A one, a two, a you know what to do.
This would be an empty world without the blues. I try to take that emptiness and fill it up with something. But they want to call me Mother Blues. That's all right with me. It don't hurt none.
Way down south and
Where's the horn player?
I got a friend.
Come on, Levy. You rehearse like everybody else.
I'm gonna get me a band and make me some records. I knows how to play real music, not this jug band shit.
You call that playing music?
I know what I'm doing. Go on and fire me, I don't care.
When I got there, they began to say.
That's to get the people's attention. That's when you and Slow Drag come in with the rhythm part, me and Cutler play on the break.
Levy, the sooner you understand it ain't what you say, it's what Ma said to count.
We'll be ready to go in 15 minutes.
We'll be ready to go, and Madam says we're ready to go, and that's the way it go around here.
These records are gonna be hits.
Please come home to me.
Every colored man in the world got to do his part. I'm gonna tell the white man just what he can do.
They don't care nothing about me. All they want is my voice.
About them songs I give you.
They're not the right songs, but I'll take them off your hands for you.
I got my time coming to me.
You don't know nothing about what kind of blood I got, what kind of heart I got beat here. Come on. Come on!
Wonderful. We got that, boy. Good session, Mom. We got ourselves a winner. Yeah, you did.
Hello and welcome to this BFI At Home event. My name is Amon Warmann and I'm a contributing editor at Empire magazine. I'm delighted to be joined by director George C Wolfe and producer Todd Black to talk about their new film, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Welcome to you both.
Hello, hello.
Hello to you.
Before I get into your fantastic film, I wanted to first ask, do you remember the first time you experienced Ma Rainey's Black Bottom on stage?
I saw it when it was in previews at the Court Theater in New York back in 1984. And it hadn't opened up yet, but everybody was talking about August and this new startling voice. And Charles Dutton was playing Levy. And I remember this sort of like tornado of energy coming on stage when he came on stage. And it was a very, very powerful performance and a very commanding performance. And that's it. I think that was, 1984. Yeah, absolutely.
I had actually never seen it before. I had seen Fences and a couple other Augustus plays, but I had never seen Ma Rainey. So my first experience was actually just getting to read the play, which was fantastic and breathtaking, quite frankly. So I was a newbie in the Ma Rainey area.
And George, how challenging was it for you and Ruben Santiago Hudson, your co-screenwriter, to zero in on what scenes from the play that you wanted to focus on and what to get rid of?
It wasn't so much about what to get rid of. I think the initial challenge is, in some respect, the play is called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, but the first act of the play is by and large the band waiting around for Ma to show up. And so that was a concern for me. I mean, in some respects, it's similar to Iceman Cometh, where everybody's talking about Hickey, and then about 45 minutes into the play, he bothers to show up. So it's an interesting dynamic, and so I wanted to try to get Ma on stage as soon as I possibly can. Also, people have assorted definitions of what the South is, particularly when it's set in 1927, and what the North was like, and what Chicago was like. And so I was personally very interested in blowing up all of that. Because what's really interesting to me is Ma Rainey at one point says, I don't like it up north anyway, so I can take my black ass back down south where I belong. And that's a very startling statement to make, because we all, as part of the common mythology, is that every single Black person in the South was cowering in the corner because of the Jim Crow laws and because of the Klan and because of lynching and all these other sort of violent things. And but one of the things that's very interesting, and I'm from the South, I'm from Kentucky, is under the strictures of segregation, in many respects, Black people were able to create their own economic, spiritual and emotional constructs so they could live inside of them. And so it's very intriguing to me that Ma Rainey was this entrepreneur, this showbiz entrepreneur who owned 2 theaters, who toured around, who employed people. So I wanted to give a context for understanding of her power. So she isn't just this person who shows up in Chicago and goes off on white people, but she is a person who is used to being in charge of her existence. And also, I was interested in investing in telling the story of what Chicago was, that it was in many respects an economic oasis for all the Black people who were moving there, but not everybody got invited to that economic party. And there were people who were disposable, or as Toledo says in the play via August Wilson, leftovers. So starting from there, it just became very interesting to me. And I was also very excited to get Ma and Levy on screen together, because their journey, their battles, their confrontations, as well as their own individual confrontations, Ma with her manager and the owner of the studio, and Levy with his fellow bandmates, constitute the story. So I wanted to get that dynamic going between them as well.
When George was developing it and we were all reading drafts, I know George both in the development and even while we were in pre-production. I remember at one point, I think it was in your office, Denzel and I came into your office, and there was a moment, I don't remember where it was in the script, where there were 2 big speeches, one from, I think, Glenn, and then another one from Chadwick, I want to say, or maybe Coleman. I can't remember.
It was Chadwick, yeah. It was Chadwick first, then Glenn, yeah.
Right, and I remember you saying, you know what, I don't want to do a big speech on top of a big speech here. We want the audience, and you were talking about the audience when, and you had a real sense, and that's when I knew we were in fantastic hands as well, is you had a real sense of the way it was going to play in the theater, so to speak, or on Netflix, so to speak, really how you wanted to separate one big speech on top of another big speech. And that was I thought that was just very smart. And you really had, you had such an awareness of that as far as rhythm goes throughout the directing of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I definitely want to get into those speeches because I think they are fantastic. But before that, I wanted to ask both of you, if there was any one scene that you could watch with August Wilson and ask if you got it right, what scene would it be?
George, you go first on that one.
I don't know. I think probably the whole movie. Because it's his play, but it's different, and things have been cut, and things have been added, and things have been moved around, which sounds like violation. But I would be curious to see how he felt about it, because anytime anybody does any work of art, they bring a piece of who they are to it. At the same time, hopefully it's not just a narcissistic journey, but I prided myself on digging into the material and trying to accentuate or explore or get behind choices that were part of the script anyway. It's just like, Levy keeps on talking about this door. Levy keeps on talking about this door. Well, what's behind the door? Well, we don't necessarily see what's behind the door, but it became a very intriguing clue to me about, let's see what's behind the door. So there were certain things that I believe magnify, or I'd like to believe magnify the intensity of this brilliant, piece of writing. And I'd be curious to see what he thought, or maybe at the end of it, he would turn to me and say, "Get out!" I don't know.
I will say,
I would love to share the entire movie with him, particularly not just the film, but also the performances, which are magnificent and extraordinary, and that allow, and those performances fly in those actors' mouths, and they take flight. And so I'm very proud of that and I'd love to share that.
it would be fantastic to let him to have him watch the entire film. I do know this, when we showed the film to his widow, Constanza, she let both George, myself, and Denzel know how absolutely proud that he would have been, and it would have been exactly what he wanted. And I think what George did so beautifully is he kept he really honored, I think, what August was going for. I think that was highlighted in every scene. And I think that's, if I'm a betting man, that's what he would have been most proud of, is even though it was turned into a cinematic experience, it really kept the integrity of the story and the characters and what it's about. And it highlighted that. I think George did an incredible job of highlighting that from start to finish. So, it's a great question, and unfortunately, it's one we'll never find out. But it's a great question to think about.
Yeah,
absolutely. You mentioned the speeches. One by Chadwick. He has two, and they're both incredible. My first question is how many takes of those speeches did Chadwick do? And the follow-up to that is, what's the reaction in the room when you say cut after a scene, after some of the takes that he does in this movie? And that goes to George.
Looking back on it, I would say, the speech about his mother and his father, and then the speech where he curses God, I would say we probably did maybe 5 or 6 takes of that. And I remember very specifically, there were a couple of times we had a 2-week rehearsal period, and we were all just sitting around, and we would, I would crudely stage the scenes, and we'd talk about them and spend all this time. I remember one time the Levy and the band, it was Chadwick and the other actors, we were all sitting around just discussing that second scene where he goes off on God, and we were just doing it very casually. And I thought at one point, because it was very informal rehearsal, Chadwick was going to stop. But when it got to the crescendo of the speech, he kept going. And then at one point, it was really fascinating to me, because at one point, you couldn't tell whether or not he was driving it or it was driving him. And it became it became really emotional and very raw and very vulnerable. And I remember he started sobbing, and Coleman hugged him. And there was just this moment of extraordinary intensity. And, part of me was incredibly very moved. And the other part of me, the director, part of me was going, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. Let's film it now. Let's film it now. But it was a very interesting and very intense process. And after every single take, particularly his conversation with God, he would leave the room. And this is so very, the image of it is so specific to me. And there were stairs just outside of the band room, which is where a number of scenes were played. And he would be over there, fundamentally collapsed on the stairs, and he'd look over and see me coming. And I'd say, do you have time for some notes? And he'd just gesture, and I'd go over, and I'd talk to him about a thought or an idea or an impulse. And then we'd leave, and then we'd set up, and then he'd be back in it, fully engaged, processing the note, completely going every single time to that emotional, raw place. So it was exhilarating to watch, and thrilling to be a part of watching his work and watching how generous and committed and available everyone was perpetually to each other while we were filming.
And I will add this, what was really interesting is we had, the producer's monitor, and we had for hair and makeup and sound, they all had their monitors. And I've never seen crew, lots of crew, lined up at the monitors like this, just lined up watching take after take, because it was hypnotizing. And George, you didn't see that because of where you were at the, right on the near to the set. So you couldn't see the whole crew, but literally every day, George, every day,
wow,
on so many takes, the whole shoot, people were glued to watching it if you couldn't see the set. And it was my experience of doing this for 100 years is when that happens, and it doesn't happen very much on a movie set, you know you're making something captivating. And that was definitely the case, certainly with the Chadwick scenes, with all the scenes, quite frankly, with Viola, with Coleman, with all of them, all their characters, it was captivating. And the crew were glued to their monitors. Yes, they were doing their work, but they were glued to the monitors. It was such an interesting thing. I'll never forget it, ever, ever, ever. It was fascinating.
And just watching that scene back now, obviously in the wake of Chadwick's passing, it's hard not to watch it and feel like he knows he's running out of time as he's delivering the speech. Does it hit differently for you now in the wake of Chadwick's passing?
Well, I think the thing that is very important is that Chadwick signed on to do the role, and he passed through New York, and he and I talked about it, and then we went into our rehearsal period, and then we filmed it, and then by the time I finished editing 99% of it, I shared it with him, and then by the time sound and everything was done, as much as one could, and then there was an ADR session that we had with him, he and I communicated, and either in person or in text. So I have a sense of a profound sadness and an incredible sense of loss. It was just his birthday a couple of days ago. So I feel that, but every single moment of working on the film and every single moment of editing and putting together the vibrancy of his work and the vibrancy of him as an artist was with me. So I'm inside of the energy of the celebration of his brilliant work and Viola's brilliant work. I feel an incredible sense of joy that a project that I was connected to was able to capture such astonishing performances and his astonishing performance. My sadness about his passing is over there, and my joy about the wonder of his work is over here. And anytime I think about the work, that's what I experience, the joy and the pride.
Absolutely. Todd, the other co-lead of this film is Ma Rainey herself, Viola Davis. I've heard that she didn't initially want to do it. So what were those conversations like when you got that answer? And was there ever a point where you were looking at any other actors in the wake of getting that answer?
Well, Viola is so funny. This is my, I think this is my fourth film with Viola. Denzel and I discovered her for Antoine Fisher. She had one scene in Antoine Fisher, which personally I think she stole the movie. And her go-to place is either I'm not right for that or I can't do that, right, George?
Yeah.
So on this particular one, I knew immediately she was going to say, before George or Denzel or myself called her, that she wasn't right for it or she couldn't sing, or I knew it. And I had told Denzel that. I think I told you that as well, George. Mm-hmm. And so Denzel's like, you call her. And I'm like, no, you call her. And he goes, nope, you call her. Because I don't want to call her, you call her. And I called her, and we did our usual chit chat up front about her kid and my kids and back and forth. And I said, you want me to tell you about something great? She started laughing. She goes, there you go again. And I said, it's really good. And I said, and George is directing. She goes, well, I love George. And I said, it's August Wilson. She goes, well, what? And I said, Ma Rainey. And she goes, it's the greatest, but I can't sing. I can't do it. There's better people. That's what she kept saying. There's better people. And I said, well, do me a favor. When you come up with a better person, will you call me back and let me know? And she started laughing. And the next thing that I knew, I talked to George, and George said, tell her to stop worrying about the singing. You remember that, George, that conversation we had? Mm-hmm. And the minute he freed me up to go back to her, to free her up, I literally could see the light bulbs. I could hear the light bulbs over the phone go, oh, okay, let me get back to you. And I think it was 2 days later, I was on the phone with her, and she never said I'm in. She just started talking about the character, and then she talked to George, and then she talked to Denzel. She never said I'm in. She never said any of that. It just kind of organically after that happened, which is very Viola. And then you can never tell her how great she is because she can't hear that at all. But from beginning to end, pretty great.
I'm noting down all your persuasive tactics for usage in future. So thank you, Todd. I'm taking notes. Thank you. I love how every member of the band gets their moment, and all these actors are so clearly enmeshed with their roles. Were there any discussions that either of you had with them that led to a change or an interesting take that you didn't foresee?
Well, like I said, we had a 2-week rehearsal period, which I think was really valuable. I remember when we were filming it, particularly some of Chadwick's sort of monster sequences, and he would come up to me literally once a week and say, "Thank God for that 2-week rehearsal period," because the language is August's language is so intense and thick and astonishing that it needs to enter your body and then come back out, so it doesn't come across as writing, but it comes across as, which is what August has written, which is all these characters are brilliant storytellers. And so it afforded a time for the language to enter in. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was that there was this dynamic at play. Prior to filming, we recorded the music in New Orleans, and I was down there with Branford Marcellus and members of his band, and his piano player was the youngest guy, and all the other musicians just talked shit about the guy because he was the youngest guy, and they picked at him and picked at him and picked at him, and his role was to take it. And it was so fascinating to see that, and I brought that information and the images of that into the rehearsal process, and that's what these guys are doing, and they're picking at Levy, except for Levy is not going to let anybody pick at him. And so it just became this really interesting idea, and one of the things that I talked with them perpetually about is less so in terms of their monologues, but more so in terms of the play, of thinking of all the scenes in the band room as an endless series of boxing matches. And that instead of throwing punches at each other, they're hurling language at each other. And they hurl language at each other, and the language is a series of punches and jabs. And sometimes people have to retreat into the corner, and then they retreat to the corner, and they come back, and then they throw a series of punches and jabs. And so it became a way of thinking about the language that became a way to animate it. It also became a fun way to think about shooting it. But also, it allowed a perpetual shifting ground of the dynamics of power at play, but always in all of the scenes, which is one of the things that I think is interesting. Somebody can be up in the other character's face, and then 2 seconds later, they have forgiven that person and moved on. And this dynamic goes on and on and on until the story reaches at one point where Levy, back into a corner, no longer has that availability because he's lost hope. So just perpetually playing around with that dynamic of who's on top, who's got the power, who lost the power, who's gaining the power, discussing that sometimes in a general way and sometimes in a very specific way, I think liberated them to play and to use the language in an exhilarating, glorious way that I think freed up everybody so that each take was about, and now round 2, and now round 3, and now round 4, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I will say this, because George insisted, and this was a firm thing that George was so right about, and early on, very early on, George, you said to me, I must have 2 to 3 weeks. I think you wanted 3 weeks, actually.
I wanted 3 weeks.
Yeah, of rehearsal. And I was super careful. Denzel and I were both super careful because I went through it on Fences as well, because it's all about the words, like George was saying. You have to make sure that the director has that time with his and her actors when you have something like August Wilson that you're doing. It won't work if you don't have that time. And George knew and was so firm about it. And I do think, just to answer your question even more, there weren't a lot of surprises on set because George had such a handle from the rehearsals, as did the actors, about what they were doing and where they were going, that it couldn't afford surprises. We needed to make sure that it was landing, like you said, George, a boxing match. You needed to make sure you knew it was landing when those cameras were rolling. And certainly those rehearsal weeks provided that. It was almost like insurance, George, wouldn't you say that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was a chance for the actors to find safety with each other. It was a chance for me to evolve the way of what language to use, because when you're dealing with an actor, there is no patent language. I talk to Chadwick different than the way I would talk to Coleman, different than the way I would talk to Glenn, different than the way I would talk to Viola, different than the way that I would talk to Dusan, who played Sylvester. So it's a chance for everybody to evolve a way of working, and so that therefore it isn't about finding, it's about exploring and excavating and lifting up, because filming is not the time to figure it out. Filming is the time to fly.
We didn't have the luxury. We didn't have the luxury of that. We lost Viola. She had to go back to do her final season of How to Get Away with Murder. So we didn't have the luxury of, Netflix was so generous in the schedule that they gave us, but we didn't have the luxury because of Viola's schedule. So we had to land it right when we were shooting, which, thank God for that rehearsal. George brought in Tobias, our cinematographer, Ann Roth, our brilliant costume designer. George knew how to include people in these rehearsals at the right times, so that when we were on the actual floor shooting, everybody was right up to camera and knew what they were doing. We did not have the time luxury to figure it out on the day of.
Yeah, but also even with the time, I wouldn't have done it any he had 4 years. I wouldn't have done it differently, because all of them kept on hearkening back to that time in the room where your sense of play and ownership and this is mine and let me find me in it. And also it was during that time where all the members of the band, the guys were learning their fingering for the instrument, and they had tutors. So then when they left rehearsal with me, they would go into tutorial sessions with their tutors, so that therefore anytime I would cut to them, or anytime the camera was on them when we in the middle of a number, the fingering was exact the way it needed to be. So that therefore we don't have a little musician in the audience standing up and going, "That's wrong." So it was very important that there
authenticity,
was musical authenticity that was at play as well.
So Todd, I've heard you say that one of the interesting things about producing is that the vision you have of your movie in your head at the beginning is usually different to the final result in interesting ways. So if that's true of Ma Rainey, in what way is Ma Rainey different with the final product than it is to your initial vision?
It's a great question. It's always very funny. I can't speak about other producers. I can only speak about myself. But every movie that I have made over the 30 plus years I've been doing this, you do go in as a producer. And then George, I'm sure it's true as a director as well. You go in and you do have a vision of what you want and what you hope it will be. And sometimes it gets close. Sometimes it turns out differently and maybe even a little bit better, maybe not as good as you had hoped. I will say with this, I had hoped that it would reach the stars because of George and the material and the actors. And I knew the possibility was there. I did know the possibility was there of it being one of these once in a lifetime experiences of a film that you get to feel in your bones besides the visual of it. I knew that, and I knew George's vision because he really, more than any director I've ever worked with, really is just unbelievable at telling you or a department head a vision. And the more he would talk, the more it would come into focus. So he would start here and you kind of got, oh, I get that and I get that. And then he would keep talking, then you go, oh, I get this. And then eventually you would really get the focus of what he was talking about. So I was very clear what I thought I was going to see at the end, but it even surpassed that. The first time I watched it, I just couldn't believe that it was way better. And I knew it was going to be really good, but it was way better even than in my wildest imagination. I mean, George in the cutting room, there's no one better. And his sense of rhythm, there was such a sense of rhythm to the cut. And pretty much the cut that the movie that you saw was pretty much the cut that George delivered. I mean, we didn't do very much. I mean, there were very tiny little sound things or whatever, George, but that's your cut. And that's amazing. That really, I could just say as a producer again for all these years, that rarely happens when a director turns in his cut after 10 weeks. You know, you make so many changes and this and that and looping and changing and moving around scenes. And I remember I got a call from someone at Netflix saying, is there anything on the cutting room floor? And I said, there is not anything on the cutting room floor. George knew what he was shooting and what he wanted. He had a vision from start to finish. And I have to say, you know, as a producer, to get to experience that and understand from the very beginning what a director's vision is, and he was so clear about it, and that it topped itself, that never happened to me before. So I'm just thrilled at that. You know, it's a very satisfying thing as a producer for that to happen. Let me just say that.
And on that note, unfortunately, that is it for this fascinating Q&A from Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. My thanks again to director George C Wolfe and producer Todd Black. Thank you for hanging out with us and watching it. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is available on Netflix now. If you enjoyed this event, please consider donating to the BFI. They are a charity and their venues were closed during the most recent lockdown, so your support helps keep them going. Thank you and good night.